elevate some best practices, share insights, and help in development. Let me first introduce myself. My name is Rihab Salam, and I am the International Relations Manager in the Egyptian Exchange. And now, we will start by a short presentation by my colleague, Mr. Mohammed Abul Magd, who is heading the Strategic Planning Department in the Egyptian Exchange, followed by a panel discussion, and I will introduce my panelists in a short while. Let's start our presentation.
I would like to thank you for joining us today to discuss the important topic of the role of carbon credits in Africa's climate change mitigation efforts. Through the journey, our topics will be introduction to carbon markets and their importance in the decarbonization process. Second, type of carbon markets, global and regional VCM trends, overview of the Egyptian Exchange's effort in launching the African voluntary carbon market, and last, opportunities and challenges of carbon trading in Africa. In the first slide, we will introduce the carbon markets and their importance in the decarbonization process. Carbon markets are a system for trading carbon credits, which are instruments that allow companies and governments and other organizations to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions. Carbon markets can play an important role in the decarbonization process by providing a financial incentive for business to reduce their emissions. In 2021, the world emitted a total of 36.3 billion tons of CO2. African countries need to take the lead in reducing their emissions, and African countries need to invest in clean energy technologies. By working together, the world can reduce CO2 emissions and avoid the worst impacts of climate change. We have two types of carbon markets: compliance carbon market and voluntary carbon market. Compliance carbon markets driven by binding emissions reductions targets or other types of regulations. Examples for that: Kyoto Protocol emissions trading system, the existing one, EU emissions trading system, the California Global Warming Solution Act, USA. The second, voluntary carbon markets, it's driven by corporates or individuals who wish to offset their emissions. This is a voluntary offsettings. And the existing carbon markets are like CPL, Air Carbon, EAX, Climate Impact, and Carbon Trade Exchange. In the next slide, we have some trends about 2022 figures of VCM. We have in the supply side the issuance 25% above the 5 years average by 45.8 million carbon credits issued in December 2022, the highest monthly issuance on record. In the other side, the demand side, retirement, 45% above 5-year average, 3.4 growth in demand in 2022 compared to 2021. Pricing, overall prices in 2022 are around 40% higher than in 2021. In this graph, demand has been steadily growing in the past 5 years, with new buyers entering the market, accounting for 57% of retirements in 2022. In the other one, more carbon credits were issued during the first 6 months of 2022 than in the full years up to 2018. Let's focus on the Egyptian Exchange and its role for launching the carbon market. During COP27, Prime Minister Dr. Mustafa Madbouli announced that the VCM in Egypt will have the ability to contribute effectively to achieving the international goal of carbon neutrality. The Financial Regulatory Authority and the Egyptian Exchange are working to develop the regulatory frameworks business models, and organizational structures for the EGX VCM hub. The FRA has approved carbon credits to be tradable financial instrument through a Prime Minister decree and amendment to the Capital Market Law in Parliament. They are setting standards and regulations that guarantee the highest level of integrity for the hub. As a Pan-African trading platform, the FRA and EGX will be working to synchronize more regulatory frameworks across Africa for verifiers and validators to reduce the fixed cost of validation and verification process. In this slide, we have EGX milestone. It starts with meeting with the officials from the Egyptian Environmental Affairs Agency and other related parties for discussions, followed by presenting the final idea to create a platform for registering voluntary project-based certificates. Then communicating with main stakeholders to create the value chain of the market. Then EGX Holding and Agriculture Bank of Egypt and Libra Capital Group sign agreement establishing a decarbonization consultancy and project developer company called Libra Carbon. Announcing the launching of the market on the sideline of COP27 with the attendees of the Egyptian Prime Minister and government officials. And last, EGX is finalizing the trading rules and regulations with the Financial Regulatory Authority to kick off the market. Let's talk about opportunities and challenges of carbon trading in Africa. Some of the opportunities of carbon trading in Africa are economic development, climate change mitigation, finance for development. First, the economic development. Carbon trading can create new economic opportunities in Africa by stimulating investment in clean energy and other low-carbon technologies. Climate change mitigation. Carbon trading can help to mitigate climate change by reducing greenhouse gas emissions. This can help to protect the planet for future generations. Finance for development. Carbon trading can help to mobilize finance for development in Africa by providing a market for carbon credits. This can help to fund projects that support economic growth, poverty reduction, and social development. Some of the challenges of carbon trading in Africa is lack of regulations, time-consuming process, lack of awareness. Lack of regulations. There should be regulations and legal framework of carbon reduction and carbon trading. Time-consuming process. The process of issuing carbon credits take much time, from registration, going through validation and verification process till the issuance. Lack of awareness. There should be more awareness for investors and policymakers in addition to more understanding of carbon reduction process and carbon trading mechanism. Finally, carbon credits have the potential to be a powerful tool to reducing emissions in Africa and for generating sustainable development benefits. However, there are a number of challenges that need to be addressed in order for carbon trading to be successful in the continent. These challenges include weak institutions, lack transparency, high transaction costs, low liquidity, low carbon prices, uneven distribution of benefits, lack of awareness, difficulties in monitoring and verification, and political instability. Despite these challenges, there are a number of reasons to be optimistic about the potential for carbon trading to be successful in Africa. The continent is home to a number of countries that are committed to reducing emissions, and there is a growing demand for carbon credits from international buyers. With careful planning implementation, carbon trading can play a significant role in helping Africa to meet its climate goals and to achieve sustainable development. Thank you.
I'm joined today by my respective panelists, beginning with Ms. Begolo Kanwendo, who is a special advisor and Africa director, UN High-Level Climate Champions Team. I have also Mr. Ahmed Rojdi, who is Executive Director, Regional Center for Sustainable Finance, the Financial Regulatory Authority in Egypt. And last but not least, we have Mr. Helmi Abulaish, who is the Chief Executive Officer of SECOM Group. With those few words, we are getting the conversation on the road. And starting with Bogolu, I would start asking you specifically about how can the African VCMs help in achieving the African agenda, strategies, and climate goals?
Thank you very much, and thank you all for hosting us here today. I will reference your question to the work we did, or why we started the Africa Carbon Market Initiative with several other partners. We strongly believed that there is a big opportunity with carbon markets to unlock financing for development. And that if VCMs are done right, carbon finance could certainly be one of the solutions to what's financing for development, or play a very crucial role to driving capital, particularly in the debt-distressed economies, and funding not only nature-based solutions, but also energy and clean livelihoods broadly. So as it stands at the moment in the continent, VCMs are very little, they're very small. And if they are to grow, we would see quite a substantial figure flowing into the continent. So we are currently punching way below our weight. I think between 2016 and 2021, the continent has only retired about 11% of the global retired credits. And if we look at so VCM space, of course, the market was only about $2 billion, but the compliance market was over $150 billion. And if we've only been playing a part of less than 10%, then you see the missed opportunity. But if we were to do more in project origination in the carbon space, we certainly could tap into both the 2 billion and the over $850 billion in this market. But I know you asked a question on VCMs, and I don't just think that's where we should be focusing in the continent. I think we should also be thinking about the compliance markets, because that's where the growth has been, where how our products that are produced in the continent play in that market. But also think about a hybrid sort of model that brings in VCM issues together with the stability of the compliance markets, which hopefully will bring some sort of stability to the pricing. Because at the end of it all, as I positioned, we started the Africa Carbon Market Initiative with the thought that we could unlock financing for development. And it's not at $5 per ton that we would have a critical mass of finance for development, but is at a minimum of $50 per ton that we would really get to see those benefits. So we need to think much more beyond VCMs when we're talking carbon markets in the continent.
Great. So your insights concerning the bigger picture and the global updates concerning the African agenda, strategies, goals will automatically take us into implementation. And whereas the carbon markets are not regulated, but there are numbers of organizations setting standards to help ensure the carbon credit is genuine and represent real reductions in greenhouse gas emissions. So I'll come to Rojdi. Can you brief us on the role of regulators and what the role that regulators play in supporting the development of carbon credit programs in Egypt and Africa.
Okay, thank you, Rihab. I believe that the regulators have a crucial role in the voluntary carbon market. By definition, the voluntary carbon market is fragmented, unregulated market compared to the compliance market, where there is strict regulations, okay? And what we are currently doing in Egypt through the Financial Regulatory Authority is creating the enabling environment for the voluntary carbon market by setting the standard and regulations for the issuance, okay, and for the validation and verification process according to the best practices. So after the COP27, we started with amending the executive regulations of the capital market to introduce and define the carbon credit, the voluntary carbon credit as a financial instrument. In this regard, we have two models actually to consider it as a commodity like the US model or as a financial instrument like the EU model. And we defined it as a financial instrument, okay? After that, we established a high-level committee for the voluntary carbon market. The committee actually is responsible for setting the ecosystem of the carbon credits. Especially, it is, the committee responsible includes setting the selection criteria for validation and verification bodies with the international and domestic VVBs according to the best practices. Second is issuing the guidelines rules for integrity and credibility of the carbon credits following the Integrity Council, VCM, and its 10 CCP, the core carbon principles and the assessment framework, okay? Because actually at the end, we don't need just an issued carbon credits, we need a high quality and integrity carbon credits to be issued and traded in the Egyptian and African markets. In addition to the VVB and the integrity, the committee is responsible for setting the selection criteria for the carbon registries, because we already have an international recognized carbon registries like the Vera, Gold Standard, the GCC. But actually, what if we would like to introduce some African registries, some domestic Egyptian registries? We should specify the criteria for selecting those registries according to ICRO and IETA standard and ecosystem. And finally, collaboration with the Egyptian exchange in setting the trading regulation and transparency and disclosure regulations for the voluntary carbon market.
Great. So from regulators into organizations and private sector, trying to keep the full picture into implementation. And I want to extend the discussion to include small farmers and other producers in the African countries who might be having actually a significant opportunity to participate in the carbon market as well. They are often involved in activities that can generate carbon credit, but there are a number of challenges that small farmers and other producers face in this regard. So now, Mr. Hilmi Abulaish, can I extend my question to you, being the CEO of SECOM? Can you tell us or brief us about how can carbon credit programs be more accessible to small-scale farmers, community-led projects, and landowners, given their limited scales and resources?
I mean, this is a very good question, of course, and one we are all working on together. I can only share our experience in this regard. And the one thing is we have seen these numbers here of emissions from the one side, and from the other side, a commitment of the whole world for a race to zero from the other side. And what does it mean? Whereas we all do not intend to commit suicide, because this is the only way not to exhale CO2, and we are all not intending to close our businesses, so we will always need a balance for remaining emissions. How big this is and how much we can reduce and how much we have to change our lifestyle and so on is all on the one side, but there must be an acknowledgement first that we need from the other side something to balance out emissions. And such natural-based solutions like forests and like agriculture and like oceans are our best bet at the moment. Now, on this side, and this is where the model of what we have done in Egypt comes in, there are millions of smallholding farmers. And for them to access a very sophisticated voluntary carbon market with a very, very sophisticated verification, validation, and registry, and so on is not an easy thing. So what we need now is we have to develop a model which simplifies the access, which builds capacity for smallholding farmers to really learn what it means to go into organic, regenerative, whatever form of sustainable agriculture, so that they can make a difference. Because agriculture up to the moment is part of the 35 billion. 20% or something of this is coming from us farmers. Huh? So now but at the other side, when you look to the organic farmers, you can see they can, when those emit 5 tons in Egypt per acre, average, conventional farmers, we can sequester 10 to 15. So there is a huge opportunity for system change when you look into the potential. And so what we have developed is a scheme where these smallholding farmers in Egypt who have 1, 2, 3 acres can access an organic certification scheme where they then, in addition to the organic certification, get a verification validation of their carbon balance for soil, trees, methane avoidance in compost making, and so on and so on. And this is then, of course, only the starting point, because when you have these carbon credits, then the agricultural carbon credits, then you need a governance system which secures high integrity, and you need an access to market, international and local. And this is where we are very happy that EGX and the financial regulatory affairs in Egypt are now engaging in building up a structure which will in the future hopefully allow these smallholding farmers to put their carbon credits on a platform or to let them auction on the stock exchange.
Yeah, great. And that's the hands-on experience into the private sector and into the farmers, and so we'll back to the whole picture again in mind. When talking about the finance gap for Africa's climate needs, I'll be back to Bagolo. And how do you see that voluntary carbon markets can help filling the finance gap for Africa's climate needs?
I feel like I already responded to that question.
Yeah, but did you have because you have responded quite a lot.
I feel like I already did.
Yeah.
So I might take a little bit of a detour to the question that you asked, because I think it's important that we also talk about the kind of projects that we can engage in. You know, we like talking about the money that can be unlocked in this space, but what does it take to get there? What kind of projects are we talking about exactly? And about a few months ago, the ACME Secretariat made a call for submission of projects. You know, we're still out looking for more to create a compendium of projects for the continent, because there is capital out there looking to invest in carbon projects, and then there are buyers that are also looking to buy African credits. As we saw yesterday, the UAE announced a commitment to the advanced buyers market, and we've had several others. We'll have another auction at the end of the year. So for those that are interested at the level of project origination, you know, there's been interest in the clean cooking space, and there's interest in some agro forestry related projects, and then there are those that are busy putting up solar panels across the continent. So there are those various opportunities, but the space now where we're seeing a lot of demand is in the clean cooking space, which not only deals with issues of cooking, but deals with sustainable homestead and livelihood situation. It also deals with women empowerment imperatives, and it deals with waste management. So we also have to think beyond just the finance. What are the co-benefits of working in the carbon market space? So that's the little bit of a detour I wanted to take, since we've already been talking about the access to finance that we certainly could tap into. But in order for us to have that access to finance or really have proper returns in the carbon market space, what we need to happen is for transparency of the cost breakdown and the revenue breakdown. We need to know if you're trading at $5, okay, how much of that is going to go back to the communities that are involved in the project, how much of that is going to taxes, how much, so that we don't end up with these leakages, because a lot at the moment, a lot of project proponents in the continent, in the carbon space, are from Australia, from the UK, and so in the end, we need to be careful that we're not perpetuating another capital flight, revenue flight. So the transparency in the market will be very critical as the next step of the development of the carbon markets in the continent.
Yeah, that's great, and thank you for the profound answer. Now we'll go again to regulations and to the role of VVPs, validations. So back to right to Rojdi for if you can just tell us the role of VVPs in ensuring market integrity and the real impact of the project, and can you give us a brief about the criteria of VVPs in the EGX VCM? And this we can take into consideration what have been published a couple of days ago by the Financial Regulatory Authority about the regulations for selecting VVPs.
Okay, so as mentioned by Pablo, actually it's not only the reduction of the carbon only. We have to take into consideration the co-benefits of the project, the carbon reduction projects. Okay, it may include like job creation, some sustainability and SDGs defined by the projects to be implemented. Okay, so to ensure that the carbon credit is issued with its co-benefits and the real impact in the carbon reduction, here comes the role of the VVB, the validation and verification bodies. Actually, the validation and verification bodies is the main player in the supply side. Okay, we have in the supply side the project developer, VVPs, okay, and the carbon registries. The VVB actually we can see it in the Egyptian context and African context as a bottleneck in the creation of the carbon credits, because of the very high fixed cost of the validation and verification process. Okay, to tackle this issue, FRA engaged with the Egyptian Accreditation Council, the EJAC, which is the only authority in Egypt that provides the and accredit the ISO certificates for different ISOs. Actually, back in December, okay, we introduced them with the VVB ISOs, which is 14065 and 14066, and in addition to 17029. They started with communication with the international association for international accreditation form, the AIF, okay, and currently they are training some Egyptian companies to become local and domestic validation and verification bodies, okay.
Yes.
After engaging with the EJAC, we had to draft the regulations for selecting both the international and domestic validation VVB bodies. At the international levels, we actually both the international and domestic we take it into consideration the international best practice. We engage with some local, domestic, and international stakeholders with the first draft of the regulations, got them feedback, and last week the FRA issued the decree of the selection criteria for VVBs. At the international level, okay, for example, all the VVB must have an ISO. The VVB ISOs, including ISO 14065, in addition to being a designated operational entity under the CDM, the Clean Development Mechanism, or being approved by VERA, Gold Standard, or GCC. Okay. At the international level, you must have like three projects experience in 3 projects with a total validation and verification done by your side. Then come some competencies in regarding to the work of the validation and verification. In addition to, we were keen to have like an Egyptian expert from the local market, okay, that works with the international VVB to get some knowledge and experts from the international VVB itself. Okay. After that, actually, we issued the decree last week. Okay, and utilizing all the global best practices from ISO accreditation for Vera gold standard and also the GCC.
Right, so thanks, Rosedy, for these answers and giving us like a full picture about the regulations in Egypt. So when I'm trying to be back to the local communities and about the sustainable development, I'll be back to Hilmi and want to ask you about how can the carbon credit programs be designed to ensure that they benefit the local communities and promote sustainable development?
So I, again, from our experience in Egypt, I can only tell this story. The one effort which the regulator is doing now to facilitate the setup of the governance system also within the country, of course, is making it easier, cheaper to access, simpler to access. And this is, hence, I think, a very important step. And of course, it's also important to build the capacity of the local governance players, whether they are registries or verifiers or validators or project developers. So I think it's good for us here in Egypt, Africa, and everywhere else to build our own capacity at the same integrity level, of course, than international. From the other side, and this, I think, is the important story, it's also simply a question of how much does it cost you? Huh? Projects have project development costs, pre-funding costs, certification costs. And if this is too much of an effort and takes too much of time, then projects will get lost on the way. So we have to do everything possible to find local versions. I can tell you our example. In the Economy of Love scheme, a smallholder farmer who is onboarded today and obviously will not receive any carbon credits until 1.5 to 2 years later, when we start with a baseline and we start with validation and then we have a verification and then we have all this kind of stuff, needs to pre-finance this next 2 years. And there are 3 things which he needs to pre-finance. One is capacity building. He needs to learn what is organic farming and what is organic seeds and organic biopesticides, a lot of things. Huge effort to build the capacity. And this needs, in my view at least, donation money. This needs really investment into the capacity of these farmers. Second, there are investments he has to do which are paying back. So he needs to go to renewable energy devices, otherwise he will burn all his CO2 in his generator or tractor or whatever else, and he will not have a net CO2 balance to sell. So to invest into a solar pump is a very good investment, will pay back for sure in 3-4 years, but it's a pre-investment. So we need funds for him to invest and not pay more than he was paying for his diesel. So we support this with the EOL microcredit facility today so that he can get a loan to get his solar pump. And last not least, and this is the most difficult one because it's the riskiest of all, carbon credits. He will have carbon credits, but the investments to grow the trees for agroforestry now or to make compost today and the inputs and produce it, this is all a cost and can only be, he must invest into it today, but he must get it paid back from the carbon credit. So we have a credit, we have a kind of a facility where we prepay, and he has only to pay back in carbon credits when he receives them. So no risk on his side for this transition. But when he does all this, it's fantastic. It's a turnaround. His livelihood improves 100%. He produces healthy products, and he does a wonderful job. So, but all this has to be there, functioning. Otherwise, it's very difficult for the smallholder farmer to engage.
Okay, so great. And this, I'll be back with another question to Helmi and Rushdie together. In your opinion, what role do you see that organizations, companies, and institutions can play in supporting carbon credit programs in Africa?
So actually, to answer this question, I'd like to ask exactly what the private sector needs. They need first some incentives, okay? They need high integrity and genuine carbon credits. They need trading platform to help them in efficient pricing discovery for the carbon credits, okay? At the regulator side, okay, in addition to creating the enabling environment and regulatory framework for the carbon market, I believe that the financial regulators have a crucial role, okay, in creating the demand for not only carbon credits but also the sustainability products and sustainability and ESG finance actually and climate actions, okay. To do so, the FRA introduced last year an amendment to the capital market regulations to introduce 5 new types of the bonds, which are the thematic bonds. In addition to the green bonds, we have the climate bonds, okay, the transition bonds, okay, in addition to women empowerment bonds and sustainability linked bonds and social bonds too. Okay, so having these tools in the market can be like source of source of incentives for the private sectors. Okay, and not only actually the bonds. Last month, the FRA introduced the ESG funds. Okay, the ESG funds, according to the regulations and according to the amendments, okay, is defined by, as a mutual fund that is concerned with investing in ESG, environment, social, or governance, okay? And one main major items and source of investment could be like the investing in the carbon credits as mentioned in the regulation. So here we will be providing some incentives for the private sectors to start developing carbon reduction projects and issued carbon credits.
Great. So Helmi, can you add also in that? I'll repeat the question about the role you see that organizations, institutions, companies can play in supporting carbon credit programs in Africa.
I mean, there are many different organizations. We have to specify about whom we are speaking.
You can choose. This is
okay. Okay. I'm just saying. Yeah. Now, for companies, and I go back to the first picture, every company in the room has a carbon footprint. Every company in the room can start to make its own footprint exercise and can start to make a plan to reduce its emissions, but also will stay with some carbon footprint which needs offset. I can think of no better way to offset your carbon footprint than of those from smallholding farmers, whom you will then support to have a better livelihood. So this is the one engagement, I think. The other one is, of course, of banks and international donor organizations, and they must work on access to funding, finance, accessible funding and finance, and models and programs for smallholding farmers. Simple, still with all possible guarantees, but as simple as possible, so that to make it work. And last of need. In the point is, of course, everyone in the food chain, whether it's an agricultural company or it's a food processing company or food trading company, can also always start to engage by making the right choices for its supply chain, for the quality of its products, to be regenerative organic or to process organic food or to trade organic products. And I think we should not forget, we are creating the situation we are in at the moment. We are creating the future. We cannot wait for anyone, and every one of us has to engage. Every one of us has to make the right next step. And in this regard, I think every organization can do a kind of a support.
Great, because I know that it's very hot here, so I'm going to, if I'm supposed to ask one last question. to conclude with Bigolo, in brief, what are the current and future trends, opportunities for carbon credit programs in Africa, and how is ACME addressing the barriers to scaling voluntary carbon markets?
Right. Big question for a last question. The opportunities are plenty. As we said, you know, the VCM space has been growing quite quickly. There has been a little instability in pricing, but we think, you know, there's been good market signals that show that there will be some sort of stability, and the demand is there, particularly for African credits. So, you know, if we are to follow the market signals that are out there, then we should be working on project origination in the continent. But obviously, this isn't easy. It's already been positioned. We have a really great case study here that we were just talking about it at ABLC as well. And I think many others, particularly those that want to think about consolidation of smallholder farmers, this is a fantastic case. But in going to what can we do, what needs to be done for us to succeed in the African carbon markets space, to unlock the potential that exists, about 5 things that I want to highlight. And I'll say them quite quickly so we are all free of the oven that we're in. One is really working on the quality and integrity of our credits. And this has been a common thread since we launched ACME last year. But the question that we've always been asking is, what exactly is integrity? Like, how do you define integrity? Is it the integrity of the producer or the integrity of the buyer? And I think we really do need to come to an agreement what that is and recognize the biodiversity linkages that particularly African credits have and offer. And then secondly, the right methodologies that are suitable for the continent. And methodology for us here is in particular to the nature-based solutions and nature credits. We feel, as many of you would know, that the methodologies particularly around additionality, do not work for our old growth forests, for the Congo Basin, those that have managed to secure and protect their nature. They're being punished by that, by the markets as it stands, and we need for the right market mechanisms to work for our nature. It is a good thing that 75% of Africa biodiversity is still intact. So the continent shouldn't be punished for having natural resources, but instead to be compensated for having been custodians. And then third, scaling investments for African projects. It's quite expensive to initiate projects in the carbon space. Verification is already expensive. We've already heard of the various expenses that are associated. So we urgently do need verifiers in the continent and early stage investors to jump into this space. And then fourth, creating a conducive regulatory environment. ACME is working with countries in country activation plans, creating the right regulatory environment that will stimulate project origination, but also stimulate and protect investors in this space, and investors, both domestic and foreign. And then fifth, global market access. In the VCM space, but also compliance space. Create space so that we can have access to higher prices, much more stable prices, and provide some sort of growth in both the VCM and compliance space. And then lastly, of course, we need to advocate for African carbon markets. There's a lot of climate policies that are happening out there. One such case being the EU CBAM. We need to talk about exactly how is the EU CBAM going to affect industrialization in the continent and the green development pathway that we all speak of. The climate policies internationally must reflect our collective ambitions of development in the continent and developing markets. So it's important that we make sure that there's some synergies between climate policy, trade policy, and economic development policy. Thank you.
Thank you. And unfortunately, we are out of time right now for this fruitful discussion. I know that there are a lot of conversations that haven't been gone further. There are other areas that we haven't got the opportunity to tackle. I'm pleased that the fact that we are in an agreement that the voluntary carbon markets do have a big role in driving Africa for a better place and accelerate growth. To my audience, I want you to join me in giving a warm thank you for my panelists for their participation. As well as for my panelists, I would like to give a big thank you for our audience. And on behalf of Mr. Ahmed al-Sheikh, Chairman of the Egyptian Exchange, and Dr. Mohammed Farid, Chairman of the Financial Regulatory Authority in Egypt, and on behalf of Egypt, thank you.
لا 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 نايس
like 1000